Welcome, everybody. This is Craig Pasta Jardulier. I'm here with the Kim Iverson Show. We're at the Free and Equal Debate. I'm here with the Libertarian candidate, Chase Oliver. Chase, how do you think you did tonight so far?
I feel great about it. I love getting on a debate stage. I've always been somebody, if you ever talk to me, you can know it's really hard to shut me up sometimes. So keeping me at that 2-minute time limit, I think, helped really well. But I always enjoy an opportunity to speak to voters, and I think we did really well. And I think we're winning the ranked choice voting poll right now, but you need to keep voting for that. So, yeah.
I think you're going to end up winning. You've won a couple of these before. Let's talk about the Libertarian Party, because that's where I have a lot of gripes. It was my first Libertarian convention. It was the first time I met Chase Oliver. It was also the first time I've heard about Mike Rectenwald. I think that a lot of people in the mainstream were expecting David Smith to run, the Mises Caucus to kind of take control of everything that's going on. But I got to meet you, and I got to see a guy who campaigned in 50 states, a guy who also won the debate that day, and a guy who worked the hardest. However, there hasn't been like this coalescing of sorts. One of the things you said in your speech right away was, "I'm going to bring this party together." It seems like that didn't happen. There's a lot of infighting, a lot of fighting going on within the Libertarian Party. How do you address that right now, as you're out there stomping on your own without maybe not some of the help from some of the people in your party?
Well, what you got to do is you got to keep plowing through. You have to stay positive. You have to stay focused on the job at hand, which is running for the American people, putting the Libertarian Party message out there. Now, I have members across the Libertarian Party spectrum who volunteer for my campaign, who work for my campaign. Yes, there might be some people who still have some hurt feelings from convention or whatnot. I can't convince everybody, right? But what I can do is put a very, very principled libertarian message forward that really any libertarian across the spectrum should be able to find comfort in, and obviously recognize it's a way better choice than Donald Trump or Kamala Harris if you're really voting your principles and voting your conscience. I put together a platform that I think broadly speaks to the Libertarian Party, and I've done my best to not be combative, to try to ignore the fighting and say, what can we do to unite? Who can I work with? And as long as you want to professionalize our party, help our party grow, and increase our vote totals, I think that's a good thing. And so I'm going to continue working even after November to try to keep unifying our party, growing it, and building it into a force that can actually be reckoned with on the national political stage.
I look at it as a missed opportunity, I think, for the Libertarian Party, the way they didn't kind of embrace you. I look at Maj Touré. I thought he was such a great outreach for the black community. A lot of people saying, a black libertarian. I'm like, yes, look at this guy, Maj. You're a gay man in the Libertarian Party. You've also gone to a lot of pride events to do some outreach. And I think that's great to build that party, because I would imagine that some of the answers when you talk to some people, like you're in the Libertarian Party and they're holding a Kamala sign, how were you able to convince some of those people in those pride parades to maybe come over to the Libertarian Party?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to recognize the LGBTQ community is not a monolith. There are a lot of people who are libertarian or more conservative than the Democratic Party in the LGBTQ community. We have to find those people. But really, one of the reasons why it's important to have that outreach is because if we're going to grow our party, we have to convince people who are currently voting for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump that libertarianism is better. And so many times, I was just at Phoenix Pride this past weekend. The Kamala Harris, the LP Maricopa County, or the Democrats of Maricopa County were right down the road from us. So a lot of people were coming by our booth with Kamala signs. And I said, listen, you need to take an honest look at all the choices in your ballot. Seriously, take a look at my platform to hers and see who works best for you. And I think if you voted honestly, I'd win a lot more votes than I'd lose. And we've done a lot of great outreach. In fact, we've met a lot of voters at these pride parades who are like, oh my God, I'm so glad libertarians are here. I'm a libertarian, and I'm glad you're out here bringing more libertarians in the tent. And of course, we have to do a lot of other events outside of Pride, but it's just been an honor as the first LGBTQ candidate to really be on the political stage and say, listen, we can run for office, we can be represented, we can do the things that any other person can do and feel like our vote and our voice matters as LGBTQ people. I think that's a good thing, but ultimately, I'm here to represent the Libertarian Party. Whether you're gay, straight, cis, or trans, I want you to know that liberty is the solution, limited government is the solution, and not having to rely on an overly abusive and intrusive federal government that robs us of our liberty, robs us of our privacy, and exports violence around the world.
There's a lot to unpack there, and I got a lot of questions that will come right from that last statement over there. Let's talk about the statement. That what makes you can also break you. The outreach in the pride community, I think, is great. But there's a lot of people who've been critical, especially some of the libertarians on the right side, about your comments when it came to story time telling with drag queens and whatnot. Why is a pride parade even necessary?
Well, I think the reason why we have Pride is first off, it's to commemorate Stonewall, which is actually a very libertarian event, an event in 1969 where people said, no more am I going to let the government aggress against me for just being who I am. I'm going to push back and fight for my individual liberty. So I think that's something worth celebrating. But even more so, I think it's important for our community to come together to have a unified voice around topics that are important to our community, to recognize that we are a section of the population that is growing and that more and more people want to be able to live free, to be who they are, love who they want to love, express themselves as they want to. I think that's a very libertarian thing. Now, I will say this: I didn't only go to pride parades. Now, maybe that's what the folks online who are critics might see. But I've been all over the country to all kinds of events. I'm heading to a state fair tomorrow. I've toured factories. I've met business owners. I've met educators. I've spoken at schools. I've spoken in all kinds of places. But as the first LGBTQ candidate, it's kind of awesome to be able to go to a pride parade or a pride festival and say, LGBTQ people are rising in the political ranks and we have more voice than we used to. And you don't have to feel ashamed of loving who you want to love in order to run for public service.
That's an awesome answer. Let's talk a little bit about some libertarian ideology that might bleed into some of the confusion some leftists of mine. I call myself a leftist libertarian.
Mm-hmm.
However, I've never been registered as a libertarian. I've been registered as a Democrat before, so I can vote for Tulsi Gabbard in the primary, Bernie Sanders in the primary. What about central planning? Because I think there's a lot of talk about communism and socialism. I sometimes see your vice president candidate on Twitter talking about socialism, just going after it hardcore. I'm not running around with a socialism shirt, right? I'm not a pro Lenin guy, whatnot. But to me, central planning makes sense. Working together in a sandbox to achieve, playing nicely in a sandbox to achieve a common goal, whether it be infrastructure, high-speed rail, all that some stuff seems logical to me. How do we get to that without squashing, the whole libertarian, everything's local, right?
Yeah.
How do we get like infrastructure and all this stuff done if we don't obtain and harness central planning?
Well, I think, for instance, we had roads before we had giant infrastructure programs from the centralized federal government. The truth is centralizing power, centralizing what we do creates inefficiency. It creates the cracks that people fall through. Decentralization allows for infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And so it really allows for us to address issues, with the best conditions possible. When we centrally plan, we're essentially trusting 435 people and the bureaucrats that work underneath them that they're going to be able to find all the solutions. But they don't know you. They don't know me. They don't know the individual things that make us different. And that's why I support decentralization of power on so many levels. There are some essential things the government needs to do. Government needs to protect you from being invaded and having your civil liberties violated from outside the nation. That's why you have a military, that we can cut ours down. You have a government that allows for disputes to be adjudicated civilly through civil courts and through the court system. And you do have a system of laws and law enforcement to protect people when their liberty is being violated. Outside of that, every other kind of central planning is just inefficient bureaucracy. It's allowing the red tape to be created that wastes our dollars. The government will tax you $1, and through central planning, you'll get back a dime. Yeah. And it's way better to allocate those resources at the community level, particularly for helping people. Welfare programs sound great, but when you recognize that you put that money through the washing machine and bureaucratic red tape, and it comes back and serves far less people than if those dollars had just been allocated through nonprofits and NGOs to help people in their community. So just because I don't want the centrally planned government to do something doesn't mean I think it doesn't need to be done. It certainly can be done. And we can certainly organize ourselves and collectively do things without using the monopoly of violence of government, because good ideas shouldn't require force. And that's essentially what government is at the end of the day, is force.
I think it was one of the great answers when you said no monopolies on violence. I think that's the strong message that rings through. However, there was a couple answers tonight I wasn't crazy about. One of the answers too, and it's just this quagmire when it comes to the libertarians, when you were talking about, and it kind of reminds me of the first question I asked you. The first question, let me remind you, it says, should the government ban gain of function? It was kind of a trick question because I knew you were going to say no, and you're going to talk about free market forces. Whereas if, even calling myself a leftist libertarian, I believe that gain of function should be banned right away. Also, I believe that chemicals in our foods and the way we grow our foods is awful. You gave an answer tonight that said that the government shouldn't play a role in that. And if somebody wants to have GMOs, they should be able to have GMOs, even if they're deadly. How do you square that circle for people who are concerned and say, I don't want GMOs, I want my food grown naturally, they don't have a right to poison me?
Yeah, if you want your food grown naturally, buy your food grown naturally. You don't have to buy a GMO. I'm not requiring it. I don't think it should be mandated. But I do think that GMOs should be allowed. In fact, many people consume GMOs. They are fine with it. They find positive the fact that we can grow more crops at a lower yield, these kinds of things. I don't think just the word GMO should actively disqualify something from being available. First off, all GMOs are not the exact same. It's a very broad term. But what I want to see is I want to see consumers making individual choices with transparency. I want people to know what's in the food, know what's in these things so they can make the best educated choice. for what's best for them. Now, yes, there's going to be instances where we have to collectively punish those who poison our air, poison our water, poison our environment. And this is why I call for an end for all tort caps, removing the caps on torts, so that way when citizens sue a company, a citizen jury can bankrupt that company for poisoning the air or poisoning the water or harming people. And when you do that, you create a real market incentive for people to stop poisoning the air and poisoning the water. And so I think this is a better way for us to have that, as opposed to waiting for a bureaucrat to decide, well, we can have this much lead in the water, we can do this, or we can do that. I would much rather leave that in the hands of individuals bankrupting these polluters, as opposed to these polluters buying off all of our regulators, which is what they do today.
Last question. Other answer I wasn't crazy about tonight. I thought that this was Jill Stein's best moment in the debate today. And by the way, once again I ranked you number one. I gave her number two, and I gave Randall Terry three. That was my personal rankings. However, there were some answers that I was not crazy about, like I just mentioned. The other answer was the Israel answer, because it reminded me of the Libertarian Convention when you went up to give your speech when you just won the nomination. Somebody in the crowd, free the hostages. And it was kind of like one of those situations where I felt like, well, Chase has kind of got to play to both sides. I felt it was a little bit fence sitting when you said screw Hamas. I know you've had some criticisms of Ron Paul in the past. I don't know if those were fake tweets out there. Maybe they were real tweets, but there are people who have criticized you for criticizing Ron Paul. Ron Paul on the floor, and libertarian-minded, he talked about how Hamas was formed, how Hamas was created. Hamas wasn't created in 1945 or right thereafter. The Nakba happened then. Hamas wasn't created until after there was a resistance and there were so many people in the Gaza Strip. Is it fair to say screw Hamas when Hamas is more than just a resistant and was actually a product of the Zionist nation?
Well, see, I think Hamas stops being merely a resistant when they resort to killing innocent civilians. And yeah, so that's why I don't support Hamas. I think they're a government that does violence, and they perpetrate violence, and they create misery for the Palestinian people. And if you had an honest government that was actually representing the interests of peace, you wouldn't have these kind of civilian bombings. You wouldn't have these kind of civilian attacks that give justification for Israel and others to come into Gaza and level it the way they have. And they're not being served by people when our governments communicate each other via rocket launches at each other. And so, yes, I can absolutely place the blame on Israel for their response to Gaza, for leveling Gaza, killing tens of thousands of people. But we have to recognize that the hands are not clean on both sides of this issue. There are people who are not acting in the best interest of either the Israeli or Palestinian people. They're doing so to secure their power, their spot, and we need to call that out, whether they are Israeli, whether they are Palestinian.
But you wouldn't say it's an even keel situation. What Hamas has done, and you just simply look at the scoreboard, I don't want to say scoreboard, but the death toll of sorts, and you see how many people the Zionist nation have killed and how many people Hamas has killed. I know that innocent people are going to die on both sides, and I hate to say that's a casualty of war, but it seems like what Hamas was doing was well within their rights. And like I said, they are looked upon as more of liberators of the people of Palestine, their representation.
I would disagree with that. I think they are not liberating anything. In fact, they are perpetuating a system that's going to keep things in place where Israel will keep cracking down on them, keep perpetuating violence.
What should have happened then? What could have somebody done?
Well, we shouldn't have had. Well, this isn't even starting on October the 7th. This is going a long term. What we need to be seeing is both sides fighting for a government that represents them as people, not representing the governments in terms of being adversarial to each other. It's both the Netanyahu government and Hamas that need to be replaced by their own individual populations, or peace is never going to happen. If we continue to have Hamas leading the Gazans, if we continue to have Netanyahu leading the Israelis, we're never going to see peace come together. So the only way we can change that is to change who is representing those populations and fighting for peace instead of fighting each other by launching rockets at one another. I recognize there's far more casualties on one side of the war than this other because we've been giving billions of dollars to Israel. But that does not justify any other violence on the other side as well. Those people who were killed on October 7th, they deserve to live their lives. They were not some sort of evil people. They just wanted people who live in peace. And that's ultimately what I want to see, is people living in peace with each other. And it's the governments in that region that are making it impossible for far too many.
Chase Oliver, thank you so much. Libertarian Party. Good luck in a couple weeks, my friend.
Thank you very much.
You got it.
Thank you so much for watching. This was just a clip from the longer, larger show that you can catch Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. That'll route you to the platform where you need to be in order to get the full uncensored show every Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Click on that link, watch the full interview. See you there.